Welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology. Today we're going to be covering the first part of Chapter 28 on the reproductive system, and we're going to be discussing the male reproductive system. Okay, so there's some terms you need to know. The cells that are reproductive cells are called gametes, and these are your sperm and your egg. And when they unite, this is called fertilization, and they create a zygote. And a zygote contains one set of chromosomes from each parent. So in humans, that would be 23 chromosomes from mom and 23 chromosomes from dad. And then you have these reproductive organs called gonads. And the gonads in males are the testes, and in females, they're the ovaries. And these are the ones that produce the gametes, and they also secrete sex hormones. So let's begin by talking about the male gonads, the testes. They are full of what's called seminiferous tubules. And this is where sperm are produced through a process called spermatogenesis. There are two really important cell types that are used in the seminiferous tubules to support spermatogenesis. Sertoli cells are also called sustentacular cells, and they support and protect developing spermatogenic cells. The other cell type is called Leydig cells or interstitial cells, and these are the cells that produce testosterone. So the process of making sperm is called spermatogenesis, and this actually begins with a cell type called spermatogonia. And these are diploid stem cells. They differentiate into new diploid cells called spermatocytes, and this process in humans takes about 65 to 75 days. After they differentiate, the spermatocytes duplicate their DNA just before they begin the process of meiosis. So you already talked about meiosis in AMP1 in Chapter 3, but if you're having a hard time remembering all the stages of it, I would suggest you go back and review Chapter 3. Just a quick hint, mitosis is what somatic cells go through for division, and meiosis is what sex cells go through for division. Meiosis has two rounds, and in the first round, the primary spermatocyte becomes two secondary spermatocytes, and they are now haploid. What do I mean by diploid and haploid? Diploid means they have two copies of each chromosome. So again, remember we have 23 chromosomes, so they have two copies, one from mom and one from dad. And then when they divide, they only have one copy of each chromosome. So now they have 23 chromosomes alone. And then after that, meiosis II takes place. And what we have now are 4 spermatids. The end stage of spermatogenesis is called spermiogenesis, where those spermatids turn into what we know as sperm, or spermatozoa. And they're basically these round spherical things that turn into the elongated sperm that we typically think of. And they have the acrosome and flagella with extra mitochondria that help them move around. But at this stage, they're not actually able to swim. So this is what we see when we look at sperm under the microscope. They're designed to reach and penetrate a secondary oocyte in order to fertilize it and create a zygote. And all their chromosomes are packed into the head. And at the very end of the head, they have this acrosome that's covered with enzymes that help to penetrate the egg. They also have a lot of mitochondria in the middle piece, and then a long tail that helps to propel them forward. But like I said, at the end of spermiogenesis, they don't actually swim. They have to mature a little more before they're able to actually move around. Let's talk about some of the hormones that control what's going on in the testes. At puberty, the hypothalamus starts to produce gonadotropin-releasing hormone that stimulates cells in the anterior pituitary to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. Luteinizing hormone stimulates the Leydig cells or interstitial cells to secrete testosterone. On the other hand, FSH or follicle-stimulating hormone is going to indirectly stimulate spermatogenesis. It acts with testosterone on Sertoli cells to stimulate them to secrete androgen-binding protein. ABP is going to bind to testosterone, and it's going to keep its concentration high so that it can stimulate the final stages of spermatogenesis. And then, once sperm are produced, the Sertoli cells are going to release another hormone called inhibin. And this inhibits the secretion of FSH by the anterior pituitary, and this basically has a negative feedback effect. Testosterone is converted into dihydrotestosterone and can have several different effects. It's responsible for some aspects of prenatal development that we'll talk about later in chapter 29. It is responsible for male sexual characteristics, including things like male pattern baldness, increased body hair. It's responsible for development of sexual function in males, as well as stimulation of anabolism, which is why males have higher muscle mass than females. It's controlled via a negative feedback mechanism. So basically, if you look at the mechanism above, you see that a stimulus, which is an increase in the level of testosterone, will cause a decrease in the secretion of GnRH, which will lead to a decrease in secretion of LH, which will cause the Leydig cells to secrete less testosterone, and the response is a return to homeostasis. Okay, enough about hormones. Let's move back to the testes. So the testes are where the system of ducts in males begins with. The seminiferous tubules is where we saw spermatogenesis occur. And then that duct continues up through the straight tubules, the rete testes, and then the epididymis. And as I pointed out before, in the seminiferous tubules, the sperm were not fully motile, meaning they couldn't really move or swim. This happens actually in the epididymis, and it's a process of maturation that takes approximately 14 days to complete. From the epididymis, the sperm move to the ductus or vas deferens, the ejaculatory duct, and then the urethra. And the urethra is a common passageway for both semen and urine. Along this system of ducts that you find in the male reproductive system, there are accessory glands. The first set are the seminal vesicles or seminal glands, and they secrete a viscous fluid that has nutrients for the sperm, including fructose, prostaglandins, and some clotting proteins. The next one is the prostate, and this is a circle donut-shaped gland that secretes milky acidic fluid and proteolytic enzymes. And then finally, the bulbourethral or Cowper's glands, and this is actually going to be secreted during sexual arousal, and it's going to neutralize acids from urine and produce mucus for lubrication during sex. So speaking of sex, semen is ejaculated during sex, and on average there are 2.5 to 5 mils of semen ejaculated, with anywhere from 50 to 150 million sperm per milliliter, which is a lot of sperm. And semen is basically a mixture of those sperm and seminal fluid, which is secreted from the seminal vesicles. And the pH of this fluid is about 7.2 to 7.7. So, like I said, the urethra is a common passageway for semen and urine. So this goes through the penis, and the penis has these 3 cylindrical masses, 2 called the corpora cavernosum, and 1 the corpus spongiosum. And then the end of the penis, the head, is called the glans, and if you have foreskin, it's covered by foreskin called the prepuce. These cylindrical masses, the corpora corpus, are what get filled with blood during an erection. So an erection is brought on by parasympathetic innervation, and this leads to vasodilation of arterioles in the corpus cavernosum and corpus spongiosum. And basically what happens is large amounts of blood enter into those sinuses, and they keep the penis erect. And then ejaculation is a powerful release of semen, and this is actually due to sympathetic stimulation at the very end of an erection. So that's the basics of male reproductive systems. Stay tuned for more about the female reproductive system in the second part of chapter 28. I want to remind you that next week is the virtual research symposium, so you're going to be required to watch some of the presentations online and submit an assignment about that. Also, let me encourage you to go and watch Crash Course Anatomy on the male and female reproductive system, because that's going to help fill in some blanks. All right, I'll see you guys next week.